Hello everyone, today we're going to look at another type of factoring, which is called factoring by grouping, and that is our goal for today. So steps for factoring by grouping, and we're typically going to do this if we have four terms, and this is a strategy that we're going to use if we have four terms. It may not always work if we have four terms, but it's something that we can try and try to break these things down. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to look for the greatest common factor, and we're going to do that for anything. We saw that with trinomials. We can also do that with binomials. We're always going to look for the greatest common factor. After we do that, we are going to group the first two terms and the last two terms, okay? And then we're going to factor out the greatest common factor of each group. After that, we're going to factor out the greatest common factor again, and that is going to be the common parentheses. You'll see what I mean in a minute when we start looking at examples. And then in another parentheses, we're going to write the GCFs. We're going to put those together. And then we're going to check to see if the parentheses can be factored again. So that's the basic steps. So please freeze this and copy these down if you don't already have it. Okay, so let's go ahead and check out some examples here. Okay, so first, is there a common factor? No, there's nothing common between all three of these terms. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to break this into two groups, and I'm going to draw a line going down in between. Okay, so I now have these two groups, and that line is always going to go before this sign. This sign is going to be in that second group. Okay, so now the common factor of my first group is x squared. Both of those terms have an x squared. Okay, now we're going to say what's left when I pull that x squared out. There's an x right here, okay, and then plus 12 here. Okay, the next one, what's common between these two terms? This negative sign, we're always going to bring it down. We're always going to pull out that negative. And both of these numbers can be divided by 3. And then I'm left with x, negative 36 divided by negative 3. That's going to be positive 12. Okay, so now looking at these two groups, the common factor of these two groups is x plus 12. So that is one of my factors, x plus 12, and then the other factor is x squared minus 3, okay? Now, last thing, check to make sure that this can't be factored more. This right here, since it's linear, it doesn't have an exponent, this is done. This right here, we could possibly factor it if this were a perfect square, but 3 is not a perfect square, so we are actually finished there. Okay, here's another example. Okay, so first, is there a common factor between all terms? No, there's not. Now, what is the common factor of these first two terms? So just looking at these first two terms here, they both have an x squared. So I'm going to pull x squared out, and then that's going to leave me 4x, 5x squared divided by x squared is going to be minus 5. Okay. Now the second group, factors of 68 and 40. Let's see here. I'm going to factor 64 over here and see what 64 and 80 have in common. So 1 and 64, 2 and 32, 3 doesn't work, 4 and 16. 5 is not a factor, 6 is not a factor, 7 is not a factor, but 8 and 8 are factors. So that's all the factors of 64. So now, which one of these is also a factor of 80? It's not 64, it's not 32. 16 is actually a factor of 80. Okay, so that's the biggest common factor. So the common factor here is negative 16. That's going to leave me with 4x minus 5 if I divide both of those things by negative 16. Okay, so my common factor, 4x minus 5 and 4x minus 5, if I pull that out again, And then we're going to combine the things on the outside, x squared minus 16. So x squared minus 16. Okay, now this middle term right here, this is a perfect square, so I actually can break it apart. Okay, so it's going to break apart. Let's just do this. Let's look for factors of 16 that also add. There's not a middle term here, so they have to add to make 0. So 1 and 16, 2 and 8, 4 and 4. I can make 0 with negative 4 and positive 4. So my factors would be 4x minus 5, and then x minus 4, and x plus 4. And that's as far as we can go. I cannot break these things down anymore. All right, next example. Okay, first of all, there's not a common factor all the way through. So now what's the common factor between 8x cubed and 16x squared? Both of those can be divided by 8, and they both have an x squared. Okay, so I'm left with x squared plus 2. The next group, both of these things have a 5. Back up a little bit. That was just an x plus 2. Okay, now both of these have a 5, and then this is going to be x plus 2. Okay, so x plus 2 and x plus 2, that is our common factor. And then we're going to put together these factors on the outside, and that is 8x squared plus 5. And that's it. I can't break the other one down anymore. Okay, here's another example. So looking at all these terms, I'm looking for a common factor, and all these things can be divided by 2. So 2 is a common factor of this thing. So it's going to leave me with y cubed minus 14y squared plus y minus 14 again. Okay, so now we're going to break this thing in half. And the common factor of these first two terms is y squared, and we're left with y minus 14. Okay, the second group, so there's not really a common factor here. So 1 is the only thing that I can pull out. I have to pull something out. So it's going to be plus 1. I have to have something on the outside of my parentheses. So if there's nothing that you can pull out, always put a 1 there. And this will just stay the same, y minus 14. Okay, so now y minus 14 and y minus 14 are your common factors. Okay, your other factor is y squared plus 1, and that's actually not going to break apart anymore. So this 2 can come down, and that's it. All right, last example. First, there is a common factor. All of these things have an m, and all of these things can be divided by 2. So we're going to factor out 2m, and then we're left with m cubed minus 10. Let me change that color there. Minus 10 m squared plus 3m minus 30 there. Okay, so now we're going to break this into two groups. The common factor is going to be m squared. We're left with m minus 10 there. Okay, the second group, we're going to bring out a positive 3. And again, we're left with m minus 10. Okay, so bring out the common factor of those two as m minus 10. Okay, m squared plus 3 is the other factor. And then don't forget your original common factor, the 2m. And we should have all of that. Okay, and then double check. So if I were to multiply those together, I'd have 2m times m, that's m squared times m squared again is m to the fourth, and that should match what you have here. If it doesn't, then something's probably missing there, so double check that, okay? So please go check out the assignment on Canvas. Let me know if you have any questions today. And this is really the last type of factoring that you guys are going to see before we get to our next test. So moving forward, we're just going to kind of review the types that we've talked about so far. So let me know if you have any questions, and have a great day.